Pokemon Scarlet and Violet introduce us to a whole new type of Pokemon, Paradox Pokémon. But what exactly are they? Well, to get into that, we're going to have to get into major spoiler territory. So if you haven't beaten all 3 stories and seen the ending, I encourage you to do so now, then come back to the video. All done? Alright. Paradox Pokemon are Pokemon from the ancient past in Pokemon Scarlet, and Pokemon from the far future in Pokemon Violet. That was pretty easy to understand, so then why would I make this video? Well, as you can see from the title, this is specifically about the evolutions of these Pokemon, or rather lack thereof. In Scarlet, for example, we have Donphan, Amoonguss, Magneton, Jigglypuff, Misdreavus, and Salamence, all of which have evolutions in the modern day. However, none of these Paradox Pokemon can evolve. Why is that? Well, I think that's exactly what I may have figured out. I'll get to the Violet exclusive paradoxes at the end, as this video is mainly focused on the Pokemon from the ancient past, as I believe their explanations are more interesting. So in order to talk about this, we need to have a basic understanding of evolution. No, not Pokemon evolution, evolution as it exists in the real world. A big question some of you might be asking is, if these Pokemon appear powerful, why would the modern day versions look weaker? Well, that's because that's not how evolution works. Now, I'm no expert on the topic, but I'm going to give the simplest explanation I can. Evolution isn't a linear thing. It doesn't seek to make the animal stronger, per se. It makes the animal better suited to their environment. Take, for instance, the giraffe. At one point, the ancestors of these animals had short necks, but one was born with a slightly longer neck one day, for no real reason. It was simply a mutation. But, because the slightly longer neck can reach food a little better, the animal lives longer and breeds more, thus passing down the longer neck gene. This continues for millions and millions of years, each generation having a slightly longer neck than the last, until eventually we have our modern giraffe. But the opposite could theoretically happen too. If this long neck one day, for whatever reason, proved to be detrimental, in a few million years, giraffes could shrink in size to be better suited to this new environment. In order to not confuse anyone, I'll be referring to Darwinian evolution simply as adapting or adaptation for the rest of this video, to differentiate it from Pokemon evolution. So how exactly does this relate to Pokemon? Well, we know from Groudon and Kyogre that there was once an abundance of primal energy in the Pokemon world, but seemingly as time went on, this special energy diminished somehow. This seems to have made Pokemon less powerful in general, and now, without this easily available energy, Pokemon just couldn't sustain themselves anymore. These strong and exaggerated features that they adapted to have were impossible to keep now. They'd eat way more than they were used to in order to sustain themselves, so over time they just began dying out. And as they did, the smaller ones would survive. The ones with less and less of these big features like great tusks, would have an easier time sustaining their smaller bodies. Great, so we know how they ended up looking the way they did, but what about their evolutions? Where's Igglybuff, Phanpy, Larvesta? I think I have an answer for that too. Although, to be completely honest, there are likely many holes you could find in this theory, so please feel free to add on to this, or share your own theories in the comments below. My personal theory is that at the time these Pokemon were taken from, they didn't have evolutions at all. Because of this intense primal energy, Pokemon had little issue growing into these large sizes easily. Hatching from eggs took no time at all. But with the primal energy dissipating, gestation times were becoming longer, which means the time it took for an egg to hatch was taking more and more time. This is obviously bad because eggs are very easy prey for predators, thus the parent or parents would have to spend a lot more time guarding the nests, which means less time hunting for their own food. So to combat this, eggs that hatch slightly faster would be more likely to survive and pass down that gene too, until eventually eggs would hatch even before they had fully grown to an adult state. Thus we end up with Igglybuff, a Jigglypuff larva that hasn't metamorphosized into a fully grown Jigglypuff yet. Though they're weaker, they're more mobile, able to evade predators, or even join the parent while out hunting. This eliminates the main issue of predators being able to just waltz up and steal an egg if the parent isn't looking. Okay, that sounds all well and good, but what about Wigglytuff then? Well, I think this is another adaptation made as a result of Jigglypuff's new environment. As time went on, we'll say Jigglypuff ended up in an environment rich with moonstones. This long-term exposure to the Moonstone's power eventually let it metamorphosize, or evolve, into a new, more powerful form, Wigglytuff. So with that all out of the way, let's explain each past paradox. Screamtail. Now we already explained Jigglypuff, but let's just recap. As the primal energy faded from the world, Jigglypuff started to become much smaller and lost some of its more exaggerated and crazy features. It adapted to hatch much faster and also, due to its new Moonstone-rich environment, gained an evolution in Wigglytuff. Eventually, all three of these Pokemon continued to adapt until they fully resembled our modern-day versions. Great Tusk. Donphan's tusk became much smaller as well as the body itself, and just like Jigglypuff, it began hatching faster and gained a larval form known as Phanpy. Brute Bonnet. Amoonguss is much the same as the others. It lost many of its stronger features and gained a larval stage. Fluttermane. Like the rest, it lost its primal features, and similarly to Jigglypuff, it likely thrived in a Duskstone-rich environment that eventually led to Mismagius. Slitherwing. Now, given the presence of wings, we can actually see that Volcarona was already on its way to becoming a flying Pokemon. Mind you, just because the Pokemon had primal energy, doesn't mean they wouldn't have had to adapt it before the fall of it at all. The fall of primal energy simply forced many to adapt or die. I believe that Slitherwing here was one that was already adapting, but perhaps the loss of primal energy sped that process up. We can see Paradox Volcarona primarily crawling on the ground, but over time its wings started to become larger and its body smaller, thus allowing it to fly, and now it can evade many if not all of its previous predators. Roaring Moon. Salamence is another very interesting one. Just like the others, it had to lose some features and hatch faster, but this one gained 2 different stages before adulthood, likely because it was so much more powerful than the others, being a dragon type. Salamence also shows us firsthand that Mega Evolution somehow taps into this Pokemon's ancestral genes and temporarily restores some of that power. It's possible that many Mega Evolved Pokemon once looked something similar to their Mega Evolutions millions of years ago. Koraidon. And finally, we come to Koraidon. We can see Cyclizer in the modern day, and it's perhaps one of the most jarring changes of all. They simply just don't look like the same Pokemon, barring a few similarities, of course. But here's my theory. I think this is a larval Koraidon that lost its ability to evolve. Axolotls have taken a similar path. Axolotls are a group of salamander that reach adulthood without metamorphosizing at all. Well, at one point, Koraidon adapted a larval evolution just like the others. This larval form, Cyclizer, found it more beneficial to just not evolve into Koraidon, and eventually we lost it altogether. Although theoretically, Cyclizer may still have those genes hidden in its DNA. I wonder if it would be possible to forcefully evolve one into a Koraidon, kind of like what Team Rocket did to the Red Gyarados? Maybe. And with that, we've gotten all the past forms out of the way, so... Alright, I forgot one. Sandy Shocks. I've been dreading talking about this one, as I personally can't come up with a satisfying answer, but regardless, I'll share what I could come up with. I believe that Magneton was once one of the Pokemon like Execute or Phalanx. A single Pokemon that has multiple bodies, or souls, or whatever these Pokemon are exactly. Perhaps over time, one Magneton segment got separated from the others somehow and became its own Pokemon? Or maybe the gestation theory works here too, but only this time, the eggs only have enough time to hatch a single Magnemite rather than the full 3 it's supposed to? It's kind of hard to say, as the Magnemite line is already kind of strange to begin with, especially Sandy Shocks. As for Magnezone, well, Magneton evolves into it when exposed to a powerful magnetic field or a Thunderstone. Like the others, I think they eventually found themselves stumbling upon these at some point and adapting to that new evolution. Now finally we get to the future paradoxes, and this segment will be short. Strangely, all of these Pokemon are robots. Like, all of them. While I would have much preferred to have a more speculative evolution approach, this isn't a video about my personal nitpicks. Many think that them being robots paints a bleak future for the Pokemon world, one in which everything has become one with the machine or something. But I actually think the answer is much simpler. I believe that every future paradox we see here has gone extinct in the future. Now, how far into the future? Well, I don't really know. If there is a concrete date, I wasn't able to find one in-game or through research, so forgive me for that. But this could likely take place hundreds or even thousands of years in the future, or longer. But regardless, by the time this point is reached, likely many Pokemon we know and love today have gone extinct entirely. But like any extinct Pokemon, they can theoretically be brought back. But perhaps instead of unearthing fossils and just reviving them, whoever is responsible for this opted to take the Team Plasma approach and modify them all with technology. This would all make them cyborgs, like Genesect. Genesect, as we know, is indeed an ancient Pokemon that has been brought back using tech, so theoretically, could be the same here. But perhaps the process is more widespread than Genesect was, making them a fairly common sight in the future. This can basically be applied to them all, although I do wonder what Miraidon's relation to Koraidon and Cyclizer is. Is Miraidon a revived Koraidon, or is it a revived Cyclizer? That one's kinda hard to tell, but let me know what you think down below. Oh yeah, and one more thing. You may be wondering, why can none of these Pokemon breed? And to that I say, well, they're so far removed from any modern Pokemon that even Ditto can't breed with them. But aside from that, why can't they breed with themselves? The game clearly states that them overtaking the ecosystem is a big concern, so it seems like they can breed. Although, it's possible that this was only an issue because they were still being brought into the modern day from the time machine. Now, with that shut down, there would only be a finite number that would eventually die out, right? But how? Well, I believe this goes back to primal energy. We know these Pokemon came from a time where there was at least some primal energy in the air, and perhaps that was something they needed in order to breed. Bringing them into the modern era where there is none would effectively make them sterile. As for the future ones, well, that's harder to say. Maybe because they're cyborgs they can't breed? But maybe they can, and it just requires some form of advanced technology they don't have access to in modern times. Again, I'd like to see what you have to say about this in the comments below. And with that, the video's over. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that I was able to bring up some interesting points. I love Pokemon theories, and like I said, there are likely many holes in my own. So let me know what you think, and feel free to share your own down below. I hope to see you next time.